Good morning. This is Read Me Something You Love, and today I'm in the offices of Random House near Vauxhall Bridge in London, and I'm very excited to be meeting today with short story writer and filmmaker Etgar Keret, who is here for the release of his new short story collection, Suddenly a Knock on the Door, which is being hailed in all quarters as his best and most mature work to date. Stuart Evers in The Independent called it a perfect introduction to his sad, strange, and moving fiction. And Jonathan Safran Foer has said of the stories, it's tempting to say they're his most Kafkaesque, but in fact they're his most Keret-esque. So, Etgar, I was just wondering how you're feeling to finally be at your best, your most mature, your most Keret-esque.
Well, I think that usually they don't write about a writer's work that it is most mature unless he had been childish before, So I'm saying, I don't think people would write, I don't know, about Ian McEwan's work, it's his most mature, So I admit the fact that I'm kind of, I would like to say childlike, not childish, it sounds kind of a little bit more respectable. But I really, this is the collection of stories that I feel closest to. It took me a decade to write it, so I bet only for cognitive dissonance reasons I would think it's my best, and I'm happy that other people feel the same way about it too.
Great. And may I just say that you are looking suitably mature. You've got Etgar is sporting today some pretty cool sideburns which have got that kind of greying, eminence grise kind of literary look about him. So so there is definitely a mature kind of
yeah. Well, if grey hair counts as mature, then I've matured the past few years.
Yeah.
Having a child, who wants to kill you and marry your wife certainly helps.
Well, what I love about all your stories, but also about this collection, of course, is that you still are able to be, even in your mature 40s, you're still able to be childlike and playful. What usually happens for these podcasts is that I ask my reader to send me whatever it is they're going to read a couple of weeks in advance. But today, in the spirit of Suddenly a Knock at the Door, and Etgar's sudden fictional surprises in general, I'm sitting here completely in the dark as to what is going to be read to me. I have no idea whatsoever. I'm feeling a certain amount of trepidation.
I would feel it too if I knew what this word means.
I'm feeling scared, okay?
Don't be scared, I'm
feeling a certain amount of interviewer fear. And so I'm just wondering how you're feeling, knowing you're going to be pulling this rabbit out of your reader's hat for me.
Well, I'm mostly obsessed with the fact that it's the first time I read something in English that I didn't write. And when you can't pronounce TH and exercise it on your own text, it kind of feels slightly less disturbing than when you do it to a writer or a poet that you really love and appreciate. So I'm a little stressed too.
So you're sort of a bit worried that accent-wise you might massacre this thing you're about to read. And there goes the fire alarm.
If it's me, it's usually the bomb alarm, kind of...
If this was Israel, we'd both be under a table, wouldn't we?
Well, I had, I think, bomb threats in Canada, in London. Right. Yeah, so stick with me and your life will be interesting.
Be exciting. Right. Okay, so there is the knock at the door. Please.
The Amen Stone. On my desk there is a stone with the word Amen on it. A triangular fragment of stone from a Jewish graveyard destroyed many generations ago. The other fragments, hundreds upon hundreds, were scattered helter-skelter, and a great yearning, a longing without end, fills them all. First name in search of a family name. Date of death seeks dead man's birthplace. Son's name wishes to locate name of father. Date of birth seeks reunion with souls that wishes to rest in peace. And until they have found one another, they will not find perfect rest. Only this stone lies calmly on my desk and says, Amen. But now the fragments are gathered up in loving kindness by a sad good man. He cleanses them of every blemish, photographs them one by one, arranges them on the floor in the great hall, makes each gravestone whole again, one again, fragment to fragment, like the resurrection of the dead, a mosaic, a jigsaw puzzle, child's play.
Thank you. The Amen Stone. I mean, the title itself already takes you to quite a resonant and a sort of a sober place. I was sort of almost expecting something quite playful. It ends on a playful note, but I was expecting something playful. But this is quite somber.
You know, it is a poem by Yehuda Amichai, who's one of my favorite poets, a late Israeli poet. And the thing I love the most about his poems is that basically it's, let's say, the angle they take toward life. It's as if, if you enter a room, you always had a feeling that he would look at something that nobody else would look, that would seem tiny at first but would be meaningful. And for me, this idea is that you have a kind of a fragment of a broken gravestone, and you find something kind of perfect and optimistic in it. Like you got the best fragment from this broken gravestone, because for me I think that a few things are sadder than a broken gravestone, because it's like it's the things that you put a man who ended his life under it, and even this gravestone had ended its life and was shattered. But to find perfection in this fragment of something that kind of you put on a dead man's grave, it's I think that there is a beautiful perspective about it. And with me, when it comes to art, I always look for some tone of optimism. I live in a region of life, in a region in the world that if I want to feel that life sucks, I just have to go out to the street. Many times when I see works of people like Lars von Trier, then I say, he's genius, he's amazing, but you know what? I don't want to see movies so somebody will tell me that people are evil and it's going to destroy each other. I want to see some work of art that will say, you know what, like, we don't ignore the fact, but under it, we think that there is something in humanity that is kind of worth the effort and pain we constantly go through. And I think Yehuda Amichai's work is, for me, a beautiful example for it. There is a poem that I actually looked for and I couldn't find in translation, that I'm translating it kind of in my bad English, but it says that always remember that the fist held to your face once used to be an open palm, which you could shake, and that's the thing about it. The life is full of transitions, and I think that when you go through very kind of moments of despair, there is something in this kind of Amichai perception saying, this is kind of a point in a sequence of things that that go down and go up and go full circle, but you're a part of something. You're, even if you're a shattered gravestone, you're a part of something bigger, something that is complete.
I mean, there's something very human, isn't there, about a shattered gravestone, because of course we put these gravestones above us, thinking they will outlast us, and they do outlast us, but even those gravestones at some point will fragment.
Well, I think that in Amichai's case, they didn't crumble, they were broken, because many Jewish cemeteries were purposely destroyed, and so this being for me, it's a story about kind of this a graveyard. I would bet kind of a European graveyard, Jewish graveyard some people broke the gravestones in it.
Yeah. I mean, it does actually remind me. One image that came to me while you were reading it was walking around. I don't know, about 10 years ago, near Auschwitz, and coming across a Jewish graveyard, and and being intensely moved by just wandering around that graveyard, and of course looking at those graves with the stones piled, the stones that other people have brought, because obviously there's also we take, don't we, as Jews we take to graveyards, we take stones and we pile them on the stones, so there's the sense of us bringing our stones to their stones.
Well, that on my last visit to Poland, I met this guy who had made a photography book that it's called, I think, like in free translation, something like a 150 uses for Jewish gravestone. And he basically went around Poland and took photographs of what people do with Jewish gravestone. People make kind of a stone benches out of them in the backyard. They use them for construction. They put them, if your roof leaks, even found a runaway for planes that they kind of, I wouldn't know if renovate is the right word, but they put Jewish gravestone on the track, so... And he did it because I think he felt there was something like strongly anti-Semitic and disrespectful about it. But in a strange and weird way, having, like, my family came from Poland, and most of it, except for my parents, basically the rest of the family died in the Holocaust. So, being from there was kind of a strange and ambiguous feeling to it, kind of thinking, that those gravestone kind of became useful in people's life. Like, I know it's a weird thing to say. I wouldn't want anybody to break my gravestone when I die. But the feeling that like, a young couple sits on my gravestone in the backyard drinking lemonade, there is like, there's also something kind of weirdly nice to it.
I suppose it's really to do with the spirit in which they are used and in which that couple sits, isn't it? Because as you say, I mean, you've presented this idea of them sitting, drinking lemonade, and in a way sitting in a very, a lovely way on that gravestone. But of course, as we know, other more tangible things like hair and body fat and other body parts were used, weren't they?
Oh, no. I think, there is a big differentiation between the Holocaust and the fact that there is anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and that and that Jewish cemeteries were always attacked through the years. It's like it's two different things, But for me, what I felt was that when I saw the book, then I felt both the horror of how like people ruin other people's graves thoughtlessly, but also it seemed almost as if that the gravestones had escaped the cemetery. They wanted to be part of life again, so those kind of gravestones kind of found their way to places that have sun and some vividness around them. Again, I think that as a writer, I know that usually what we do in life, we kind of take a bunch of facts and build a narrative around them, and we can build so many contradicting narrative. But I guess with me is that I need to have some sort of an optimistic element in my narrative as a sheer mean of survival. It's like I'm saying, if I really need art to help me find that positiveness in life, because looking around me, I cannot be passive and find that. I have to go seeking for it.
And I suppose I was also wondering whether, for your short stories, because the way you were describing how this man had taken this shard, this piece, and maybe the best piece, as you put it, of the gravestone, I was wondering if in a way that's also perhaps how your creative process works, that you build a story around an optimistic shard, often an idea or a feeling?
For sure, you know, the thing is, you know, let's say if we take a jigsaw puzzle as a metaphor, I don't think it's a good metaphor, because when I write a story, I don't have the other pieces. For me, it's more kind of like, let's say, pulling a string, I don't know, out of your coat or something, kind of following something that will lead you somewhere. I think that with me, the process is usually, I see something that moves me. You know, it could be a sentence or an image or even a person, and I try to communicate what moves me to other people. I say, you know, I saw this and this, and it was really sad. And usually they say, no, it wasn't sad, it was just plain stupid. And then I kind of sit down to write a story to explain why it was sad, you know. When I have something and I say to people I saw it and it was sad, and they say to me, yes, it was sad, then I know that there's no story in it, because there is no quest to go on. It's there on this kind of public domain. The story begins when there is this something that kind of moves me tremendously, and that I feel that through finding a plot, I will be able to explain to other people why it moved me so much in the first place.
I didn't think I'd actually end up talking with you today about Jewish themes, because your stories are, I would call them Jew-ish rather than Jewish, in the sense of thematically. You know, that these people don't necessarily have to be Jews to function as they do. And so it's been kind of special for me to see that other side of your life and your reading.
Well, I must say that I think that there is something fundamentally Jewish in my writing, much more so than Israeli. Because for me, being Jewish, or the traits that for me is strongest in Jewish identity, in the diaspora Jewish identity, is the reflexive thought, the ability to kind of think about things both from the inside and the outside. You know, when you talk about Jewish humor, this is the most apparent thing, but even if you talk about Jewish contribution to sciences, it was always kind of being inside the system but looking at it critically from the outside. This is something very Jewish, you know.
Freud.
It could be Freud, and it could be Marx, and it could be Einstein. You know, the thing about it is that, you know, the Jewish way of studying, you always study in pairs, and you study through arguing. And, you know, and if you look at, let's say, Christian saints, the strongest thing you have to talk about is their submission. But if you talk about the Jewish biblical heroes, all of them would even argue with God, you know, to prove the point. They were anything but submissive, you know. I don't know, Abraham tried to save Sodom and Gomorrah. Jonah escaped, you know, God. It's basically, there is something about this feeling of not taking anything for granted, always kind of resisting this force of inertia, that I feel that it is fundamentally Jewish. I wish we had more of that in Israel, because in that sense, I think that the Jews always gained from the fact that they were, let's say, you were both Jewish and British. So when you look at the British, you could use this kind of Jewish pedestal, you know, to look at them. And when you look at the Jewish community, you could look at them as a Brit, you know. So it was this kind of two-tier thinking that was destroyed in Israel when being Jewish and being Israel became synonymous.